Hello out there! Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in, file in. We are here at the racetrack because we're here for NaNoWriMo 2021. At least a lot of us are doing NaNoWriMo 2021. So, hey out there. Yep. So, here we are at the racetrack getting ready to write fast. At least that's our hope, right? So,
Hello,
what's what we're
hello.
going to be talking about today?
No, I'm here as well. I'm ready to learn from Daniel today some tips because I have not seen his tips for this one, and I'm interested to
Ooh.
know about your workflow and the things that keep you speedy because I can be notoriously slow, both writing and reading, and in general, I suppose.
Aw, Gareth. But actually, I'm sure Gareth will have some tips along the way too, or at least some thoughts, or perhaps some feedback about my tips. We'll find out. It could be fun and exciting. Uh, for those of you out there, though, that are engaged in NaNoWriMo 2021, how's it going so far? Let's see. We're, what, 2 days in? So you should be like 3,200 words in or something like that if you're just breaking it up by day. So curious what we're at. Maybe some of you did a little writing sprint to kick things off and you're already ahead of the game. Maybe you haven't even started yet. Um, but here, just let us know. I'm curious. We have people from all over. We have Salt Lake City, Tennessee, Ohio, Wisconsin, New York City, Washington, Ontario. I love this. Daniel is hilarious. Aw, thank you so much. That is my goal, so it works. Ooh, wait. Well, yes, thank you, Michigan. But yes, 2,169, David. All right. Yep. 2020. All right. So we've got some people off to a great start there. Somebody from Florida. That's awesome.
Just noticed we got Lori at 5,000 already.
Oh, there we go. Overachiever, I see now. If you weren't here live for our kickoff event Sunday night when we did our little New Year's Eve midnight countdown, which was so much fun, we had people on there with some pretty lofty goals. I think Lori was one of them. But we had people that were like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna totally write like 120K words this month," and I'm like, "All right, so maybe they should be on here giving us tips because I want to know how they can pull that off." But we're going to be talking about writing quickly. Now, before I get started, I'm going to put on a little caveat and I'm going to say there is no particular reason why one needs to feel compelled that they must write quickly. However, often writers will have that as a goal because they want to be more productive. Maybe they have a goal they want to get through or something like that. So please don't assume that if you write slower that we're making a judgment on you. These are just tips to help you pick up the pace if that is what you want to do. Lori's like, it's only a 90K goal. I'm sorry, I overdid it. Yes, it's only 90,000 words in a month. Just a little bit, 2,800, 1,200. Awesome. So here we go. So let's get started and let's kind of talk about these tips. I'm going to talk a little bit about NaNoWriMo. If you don't know what NaNoWriMo is, you're hearing all this jargon because you're kind of new to the writing world. The idea is the challenge to write 50,000 words throughout the month of November, which basically breaks down to 1666 words a day. Gotta love that ending, right? For all you horror fans out there. Uh,
Suits me.
yeah, right? So, one thing I would love to suggest is to remove all distractions when you're writing, any distraction that you can. Now, we all have distractions. You can go ahead and let me know in the chat. Like, what's your distraction? Maybe it's social media. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's that you'll get hungry in the middle of it. And so then that'll distract you because you'll have to go get something or things like that. Trying to take care of all those things in advance and really setting aside yourself, trying to limit some of the outside influences is going to help your productivity a lot. So, Gareth, what are some of the distractions you have to deal with when you're trying to write?
Yeah, well, I think it probably the biggest one of that would be the same for just about anybody is going to be social media. That kind of draw to pick up the phone and go, oh, what was that? Oh, there's a notification. Oh, somebody's commented on
A
my
little
post. Oh,
dopamine boost.
yeah, get a little meme chuckle in there. And for me, I think that the easiest thing, well, time when that happens is if I'm stuck in the middle of a sentence. Something I'm just not sure. You get that little momentary bump, and it's real easy just to look at the phone when you're instead of struggle with it in your mind. So yeah, sometimes for me that's probably the biggest one. I have to put the phone away, like different room, plug it in on charge, and just leave it away at somewhere I have to actually go walking over to get to it. So
Yes.
I can be terrible.
Yeah, some people will recommend, or what thing they'll do is they'll literally shut off their internet. You know, like you can unplug your router so you don't have Wi-Fi for a little bit if you're willing to do that, or you can always install an app on your phone that kind of locks it up, or on your computer. Or the other thing is just simply just deciding I'm not going to open up anything, and we'll get to that a little bit later in terms of the writing process. But just not allowing yourself to go in that direction, because once you lose that momentum, it can be really hard to get it back. And once you get into that headspace, you don't want to get out of it. I love this. The supervisory cats, and my cats are the main distraction. They try to help. I love it. It's like that old thing. It's like all the monkeys walking on a keyboard making Shakespeare. It's like, I don't know. Maybe your cats are just trying to hit the probability. I put my phone on do not disturb. Yes, that's not a bad idea. Like anything you can to just remove that, to Garrett's point, like a notification, something that's going to interrupt your mental flow, because there's only so much you can do. Obviously your mind can wander, you can just decide you don't want to do it, but you certainly don't want anything interrupting you, if you can avoid it. So trying to remove distractions, it's a pretty obvious point, but it does help. But no researching. This is what I like to say when you're trying to write fast. I'm not saying don't research when you write. And actually you might find that you're better off researching first, kind of getting that out of the way, and then doing your writing, in different spurts. The problem when you kind of mix and match is, well, you'll be writing and you're like, oh, I'm writing about whatever, some city in Nebraska. And you're like, well, I want to describe it accurately. What does that city look like? And then you'll Google it, and then you'll get sucked into a vortex. It's not really the best idea. The best idea is just kind of do the best you can. You can always put in a little placeholder. You can be like, well, I need to look into this later, flag it, something like that on a rewrite. But if your goal is, and that's what we're talking about, if your goal is productivity, yeah, don't research. What do you think, Gareth? Does research often pull you into the weeds?
It has in the past. I've actually kind of done what you recommended, Daniel. If I'm thinking in my mind and I kind of know what's going on with the story and where it's going to be set and all of this, anybody who's taken our horror course will know my view on planning in that regard in terms of settings and getting ready to actually get into the story so I'm not interrupted with trying to figure out what something looks like and where an area looks like, things like that. I'll figure that out beforehand. If I'm writing, and this is basically, well, purely based on experience, where I find myself going to Google, Googling what this thing is or how this thing works, and ending up in a rabbit hole. Next thing you know, it's a YouTube video, and then recommended videos spawn off of that, and before you know it,
Yep.
an hour and a half is gone, and you haven't written anything else. So as I'm going, if I fall into something that requires research, I'll use, because I write in Microsoft Word most of the time, and I'll just use a comment on that part and leave a comment behind saying research this, check this is accurate, and then I'll come back and do that later.
Yeah, I like this idea too. You just do the like the bracketed whatever. Something you could just easily find later, right? Find a format so that way you eventually go back and you do those finds and replaces, which you wouldn't do like that exactly, but you'd find all the different times you'd flag it. Yeah, comments in Word or things like that for sure. I do love this though. David says he tried to use a calming app with soundscapes and it ended up putting him to sleep. So I'm not going to do that again. Best laid plans, right? It's like, oh, I'm gonna put myself in a great writer mood. It's like it's so tranquil. But to that point, I cannot listen to music when I write because I also write music. That's another hobby of mine, and so it's not it's distracting because it starts to put me in that creative headspace where I'm thinking of the beat and the chords and the music. So it doesn't work. I have to like white noise will work, but that's about it. And I only put on white noise if I'm trying to tune out my family, and they know that. It's okay. I can say that. Writing sprints or Pomodoro timer methods can work well. This is where you not only set aside some time to write, but you perhaps set aside a small amount of time and you come up with a goal. Maybe writing sprints, sometimes you can find places to do them online, compete against each other. We're going to be hosting some writing sprints for the AutoCrit community during NaNoWriMo because every 5 days we're going to have a little check in. Part of that will be a writing sprint. And that'll be fun because we can all like kind of race against each other. So that could, especially if you're competitive, that can be helpful. But like the Pomodoro timer method, which is so many minutes on with a little break, so many minutes on, and just getting yourself into a rhythm like that. It can be helpful to not just put out a block of time, but to go a little bit more granular and say, okay, but for this, whatever, 15 minutes or whatever, I'm just really going to crank it through because it allows you to ease up a bit too. So it can be helpful. Do you ever use anything like this, Gareth?
Yeah, the Pomodoro kind of tomato timer method was years and years ago when I first started doing it, a complete game changer for me. Quite frankly, I found it reading about it kind of wishy washy. You know, I was like, oh, this can't really work. But no, I found it wonderful. I tend to go 30 minutes writing, 5 minutes to walk around, and that's it, and come back and resume writing again. So you just set the little timer and it goes off, and then it's, hey, you got to move, break time. Then you wander about for 5 minutes. I'll wander about, maybe read something, flick through some leaflets, and then it goes off again, and it's like back in the chair, 30 minutes more writing, and you just do that with a lunch break in the middle. And yes, it was so such a positive thing for me because, and I think like many of us, when you're trying to block out time to write around normal life, you know, responsibilities, family, home, everything you're kind of dealing with, the last thing you want is that maybe you block out, you've got 2 hours and you sit down. You know, once a week, every week I have 4 hours potentially blocked out for myself, 4 to 6. And it can be really, really detrimental, I guess, to, well, to yourself, to your mental well-being as well, when that time that you have blocked out becomes a frustration in itself, that you're sitting there and
Hmm.
after 45 minutes of writing things just aren't flowing anymore, and you feel blocked and clogged and it's just not working, and you're like, but this is my time and the clock is ticking down. You're like, I need to get this word count in because this isn't developing along. I actually found that the Pomodoro method almost completely broke that.
Hmm.
It was just wonderful for me.
Yeah. It's enabling you to take those breaks. And you need to. I mean, any creative work, um, it doesn't just grow exponentially, right? It's like however many words you get done in so much time, you can't just keep growing. Eventually you're gonna reach some brick walls. You'll have to have pauses, you'll have to go back to the well, whatever it is, creatively. So it could be helpful to put in those intentional breaks and then you don't feel guilty when you do them, right? Because it's all part of the plan. So you're not kicking yourself for not getting more work done in the whatever time it is, the 5 minutes you're walking around, but it keeps you fresh. So yeah, absolutely.
That's right. It's not procrastination for a few minutes. It's kind of stopping for a minute to put some more grease in the cogs before you
Yep.
get back to it.
Yep. Rather than just push yourself against a wall and then you're not having fun and not really in a good space. And that, speaking of which, get into a creative headspace. Now this is something where repetition can be very helpful, right? Psychologically speaking, we think of like the Pavlovian response, right? And the ringing the bell and the dog drooling and stuff like that. But essentially that's what we kind of want to do for a creative headspace. If we constantly follow patterns about different ways of doing things, we can find that we can get into that creative space a little bit faster. Sometimes it's people that, they listen to white noise or they listen to different kinds of music or they go to a specific location or there's some sort of routine. They put on a funny looking hat. I mean, that might seem kind of silly, but sometimes it's something like that. Or, I know people that they say they can't write unless they're wearing shoes. It's just too distracting. So you figure out what puts you in a good headspace so that you can get your writing done and then try to find some repetitive triggers, right? And so that way you can put in those triggers to try to get you back into that headspace. I know people that will do things like Play-Doh. They feel like the smell of Play-Doh puts them in a creative headspace because it reminds them of their childhood. So they just have Play-Doh and they kind of mess with it a little bit, and the smell kind of permeates the room, and then they get going. Um, you might feel a little silly about these things, but this is you. I mean, this is private. Whatever whatever thing you come up with that works for you is what works for you. I've heard a lot of strange ones out there, so just whatever works for you. Do you do anything like this, Gareth?
Go skydiving. The this
I
yeah,
love
this is
that.
actually where music comes into it for me. Rather than kind of listening to music while I write, just like you, I can't really do that because I find it a little distracting, especially if the music has lyrics. Then I
Hmm.
kind of fall away into that. It's like somebody talking in your ear when you're trying to read a book. That's one of the most frustrating things that I
Yes.
find it ever happens to me. However, the if any I'll go back to our horror course. If anybody here has seen us on our lives, quite often I'm sitting there wearing a Dance with the Dead beanie, which is probably the one of the only musical groups that I actually listen to get into that creative space, because I find their music a lot of the time, at least one track works really well to me tonally with what it is that I'm working on at the time.
Mm,
So I'll find a piece of music, usually from them, that kind of fits the tone of that story, and just loop that for a few minutes, and just to get into the story space. But when it
yeah.
comes time to write, that goes off, and I'll sit and write.
Yep. One thing that I find can be helpful is if you're working on a project and you have a time crunch. Obviously, time crunch or not, you're not going to be working on it nonstop, right? You got to go back to the well, but be careful about what the well is during that time frame, right? Rather than just watch any movie, you might want to watch something that kind of keeps you in the mode of whatever you're writing. So maybe a similar genre or something, instead of just kind of just goofing off looking at whatever, maybe look at something that kind of ties into what you're doing a little bit more. It can kind of keep you in that creative headspace for a little bit longer and help when you go back into writing mode. I do like this though. This is definitely like method acting approach, right? Play with a big sharp axe while thinking of a murder scene. I feel like somebody is just trying to enable themselves with their writing. I don't know, Sammy. You're making me
Yeah,
a
so
little nervous.
if you're writing a samurai story, you spend a few minutes swinging an ornamental sword around your living room or your office.
I mean, as long as you can pull that off without injuring somebody, it might work, you know? It's like write what you know, so you might as well know it. But I am not responsible for anybody losing any ears. So please, please practice such carefully. All right. Uh, try bribing yourself. This is something where people can feel a little bit silly. Maybe it seems a little juvenile, but it does, in fact, work. If there's a certain kind of food you like, well, tell yourself, well, if I get whatever it is I need to done, I'm going to go ahead and eat that. Or you can always have prizes. It tends to work the best if you can visually see it, or if it's really, like it's around, because then it feels like it's actually there versus something abstract like I'm going to buy a nice vacation for myself. Not that that doesn't work, but it often works better, from what I understand psychologically, if it's like literally it's in your house, you know where it is, you can get it, you're just not letting yourself unless you do something, because then it's like right there and it can be a better influencer. But this could be something small. It can be something as simple as, like a candy you like or something like that. Or it can be something a lot bigger. Depends on the project, depends on what works for you. Do you ever bribe yourself, Gareth?
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of this. It's part of what I call the accomplishment cycle, which ends
Hmm.
has to end with reward. Otherwise, it feels like it's incomplete, like you've just done the work for nothing, more or less. There are people who, of course, will, and I'm not going to say it's wrong, but to say finishing is its own reward. But for me, no, I have something. I like a carrot at the end, and
Hmm.
often for me, that's going to be, buying a book, buying a video game, buying a board game, something that I want. When I've actually got to the end, it's like done,
Yep.
reward, I earned this, and on to the next thing. And it's like, okay, well now I've got an excuse, and then it saves kind of arguments with the wife as well while you buy these things. So, well, I did the work and I finished a project, so I'm entitled to a thing. And yeah, we get along just fine with that ethos.
Awesome. I'm just catching up with the comments. I like this. I'll find music that fits particular characters and loop the music when writing, especially when writing about that character. Yeah, that's smart. To not only, again, if this works for you, doesn't music generally doesn't work for me, but if music works for you, yeah, make little playlists, for your characters, for the types of scenes, for action sequence, you might put on something different for. Um, whatever, a scary sequence for certain characters. Sure, don't get told, don't fall in love with making a whole bunch of playlists and not get anything done, but it can definitely help, I'm sure, especially because just like they do in the movies, right? Well, they'll use those light motifs, and every time you hear it, you just think of the person. If you have something similar like that going on in your writing, I could see that being highly effective. And yes, Angela says doing when his doing historical, the time period gets you to that place. Yeah, I would think lots of different things could work for that. Like I said, a little bit of like method acty sort of stuff, but that can work. Finding an actor that reminds you of your main character and watching their movies. Yeah, like I keeping in that creative space, right? So that when you go back to writing, you're not going from as far away from your work. Can be
Yeah,
helpful.
that's a great idea. That's a really good idea.
It's very smart. And the nice thing about that, it's a little more abstract, right? So if you're concerned that, well, I'm writing, whatever, I'm writing a creature feature, so I don't want to just watch a bunch of creature features because I'll just fall to cliches. But if you watch a movie with an actor that reminds you of the character in a creature feature, then that's not going to be quite as on the nose, right? So you run less of a risk of that. So I could see that being very smart for sure. Cookies, love it. Chocolate cake, my type of people. Celery doesn't do it. Yeah, probably not. Although I do love celery and hummus. I'm a huge fan of hummus, so that might actually work.
And I can see that one, Escray. I only get chocolate cake when I
Ooh,
reach a
that's
major writing
true.
goal. That's a good one. Yeah, so give
Yeah.
yourself a very specific reward that you
Mhm.
only get in that circumstance. There's a good idea.
Mhm. No, it is true. A true like I don't want to say indulgence, but a true like treat that you just really isolate and you make about your writing career. That's incredibly smart. If you have the discipline to do that, I could see that being highly effective, especially if it's something that you tend to really like, right? Because the nice and as long as you keep the writing goals attainable and you get it enough, you have to find that sweet spot. If you get it enough, I could see that being really, really effective for sure. All right, let's keep going. Speaking of bribing, one thing you could do, we're just going to do a little plug for some author services here, is you can think about what you're going to do next when you have written and you can commit yourself to it. So, for example, here at AutoCrit, for those of you writing a NaNoWriMo piece, well, you could be getting one of our services like a first chapter critique or maybe a story inspection that you know you're going to use eventually. And the nice thing about that is, well, you've put that placeholder in your mind, right? And so now you not only are going to finish for the sake of yourself, but you've kind of committed to somebody else, and there's going to be another step. So that can be really helpful. If not something like that, telling somebody about a project you're working on, not enough to where you feel like you've told them the story, but like just a little piece to get them excited and be like, oh yeah, but I'll get back to you when I get it done. It could be helpful because then it's like, well, there's that one person that was excited about what I was working on, and I want to do it at least for them. It can be very, very helpful for
Yeah,
that.
accountability,
Ah,
I think, cannot be overstated.
yes, I love this. I bought AutoCrit as a pre-reward. That's great. Aw, thank you. Brainstorm before getting started. Now, I don't mean before the whole period. Let's say you're going to NaNoWriMo, although obviously that's a great idea. But let's say you haven't done that. Let's say it's November and you still want to write quickly throughout the month of November. I'm talking about just sitting down a little bit before you just start putting words to paper. Just a little bit of orientation about what's going to happen and things like that. And I think most people do this. They don't just start spitting words, right? But I think sometimes allowing yourself maybe a little bit more time at that than you normally do can help you get quicker when you get going. Now, you got to be careful, right? You don't want to give yourself analysis paralysis. So you got to find the balance. But having a sense of where something is going can help you keep your momentum. When you're approaching something you haven't been to in a while, Gareth, like, how do you get back into that headspace before you just start writing? Or do you just kind of read the first couple lines, or do you kind of brainstorm a scene, or how does it tend to work?
Yeah, I'll kind of remind myself, read what's come before, leading up into the moment where it was left off, and really just take off again from there. However, it's a little easier perhaps for me because we know the terms. planner and pantser go around all through NaNoWriMo. I'm
Yep.
something of a plantser myself, falling in between.
Hmm.
So I do like to have already a kind of structural idea in mind of what's going on in this story. So picking up and running on isn't necessarily all that difficult. And of course, not worrying about it being perfect the first time around and come back and edit it. But I'll generally, before I actually sit down and start writing a story, I'll have a pretty solid idea of what's going to happen within it, and what I'm kind of working with in terms of the moving parts. So it's not all that difficult.
Yeah. I would say this is easier for planner or plotters because you can like Gareth said, you'll have something to go off of, right? You have a sense of what's going on, even if you're a planter. Um, but yeah, it's a good idea if you are dedicating a certain amount of time to a project that you do at least a little bit of planning. Even if you're a pantser type, try to see if you can get at least a little bit out there in terms of the main conflict, maybe a couple beats, things like that, just to anchor yourself so it's not just completely crazy. You might try that if you find that productivity is a problem. Of course, you may find that without that, you're able to just scurry away and write like mad, and then just trim it back. In which case, don't worry about it. I love this comment we got where I scared my best friend when I talked about my story. I want to keep doing it. That's a good reason to loop some people in on the process a little bit while you're going, right? Because then it's that little reward can keep you going. People have different processes. Sometimes people like to do that. Sometimes people love to be like super secretive and not share anything, because there's always a risk that your really super awesome idea that you're going to implement well is a little bit hard to pitch to somebody really quick. And when you do that, they're like, and you're like, oh no. And you really don't need to be worried because your implementation is great. But I often think giving a little taste can be helpful. Do you ever do that, Gareth, or do you tend to be rather closed until it's done?
Yeah, generally closed until it's done, but I think that from Psyche is really good because that's an immediate kind of boost from the beginning. If that's what you're going for, and they're like, "Oh, that sounds awful," it's just like, it gives you a personal boost. It's like, "Yeah, this is gonna be good. This is gonna be good." So you're more inclined to sit down and write it, which I think is great.
I like this. As Yogi Berra said, you've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going because you might not get there. I like that. It's kind of true, though. It is funny how that works. Seems rather straightforward, but I had to marry a guy to get him to sit down and listen to my story ideas. Worth it. Oh, I love it. Try writing some story beats, though. This is kind of like Gareth was talking about in terms of being a planter, right? And even if you haven't gone into this and you have a plan, you're already a little bit in, you might find that you'll speed up your progress throughout the rest of the work if you have some story beats as you keep going. So don't disregard that. Again, I'm not telling people to give up their pantsing ways, but it can be helpful, especially if you're trying to speed up productivity.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
Dory in the comments there quite right there. I plotted out for a guideline, but I'm a pantser. And so yeah, I think that falls quite into there. Is kind of where I fall in as well. It's understanding the story beats, kind of knowing what's going on and where in terms of the arc and what's happening. But when you sit down and write it, of course, it's not rigid. You're not sticking
mhm,
rigidly to a plan.
right. Because often it's based on how much knowledge you have about it, right? And then things start to develop, and there's opportunities you just didn't think of because you can't think of any possible opportunity when you're plotting, right? So you'll have all these you have all these advantages because by the time you get halfway through your book, it's like you have a lot more content to give you possibilities about what could happen next that you may have never thought of. So it's good not to be too rigid, that's for sure. Can we define a story beat? Yes, I can. That is a great question. A story beat generally is kind of an anchor point of the narrative. So it's generally when the character is going through something, some sort of action, or something is happening to them that is a dramatic effect of the story. And so when you put them all together, it lets you trace like the most important sections of the story where key elements happen. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense, Gareth? I was like,
It does. They're
okay.
essentially the major occurrences in the story that are the major plot points, or sort of crossroad points, or like Daniel said, major anchors to the plot, or anchors to the theme as well of what's going on in the story. So
Mhm.
think of it like those terms that you see all the time, like the inciting incident and first major plot point or first major conflict after that. These just broader or heavier markers of where the story arc is going would be called beats all through it. But of course, there's events, things that happen in between beats as well. So it's not a story isn't just the major beats.
I was just laughing at Lori's comments because she's like, she's drifted off from her story beat of last month. One of her two main characters decided to already come to life and burn down their parents' house. I just, I just love the nonchalant way that authors get to talk about their characters. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Somebody decided to murder somebody. Whatevs. Like, love it. Yes, a beet is a small red veggie, but we're not going to go back to beet puns. You beat me to it. Wow, really? Mushroom people. Wow, we're getting some deep cuts now. For those of you just joining us, I apologize, but you'll have to go back to the archives. It's going to become Doctor Who for a while. They're going to be hard to keep
Yeah,
up with
we've
us.
we've officially developed in jokes and autocrit lore.
I love it. I love it. All right. So, yes, keep your character motivation up front is a good way to be productive. What do I mean by that? I think sometimes what can cause writer's block is that writers can think of, what should happen next in the story or in the plot or things like that. And sometimes a way to get past that is just simply think, what does the person I'm writing about want most, like right this second? And start there. It's kind of like the equivalent of, they say, if you're stuck on the couch and you can't motivate yourself to get up, the first thing you should do is just think about moving your pinky. And it sounds really strange, but just moving your pinky can sometimes just be enough to kind of get you out of your lock of just being stuck there. So it's kind of the same thing. It's like, maybe the character you're writing about, they're just really hungry. Well, then you can start writing about that. And sometimes you'll find that'll just flow you back into what should happen next, right? Because it'll just lead to the next thing. Sometimes thinking about it from a holistic, what's going on in the story perspective can just kind of freeze you, because then you're thinking, well, you're kind of thinking less of a in the moment way and more of an analytical, way. And I don't know, I find it can be helpful. Do you think something like that, Gareth? Do you understand what I'm getting at here?
I do. I think there's a couple of things, elements buried into that. I mean, one of the things that I firmly believe as well is that writer's block is most often caused by not understanding characters and not understanding their motivations, or losing sight of their motivations. That is why I always say, whenever you're writing any scene and you're coming in, writing developments, same thing in storytelling, whether it's prose or screenplays, is always having an eye on character motivation. They need to want something. They always want something, and they're going
Mhm.
after what it is that they want in that moment. It helps you when you're keeping an eye on that. It helps you to avoid what I call chasing squirrels. You know, when you just like, oh, I'd like to send them over here so they can do this thing that they're interested in. Um, but it becomes completely separated from the plot. We're no longer on the main plot line, and it's not even a subplot. You've just sent them off so we can see that they like this hobby. That's not very interesting. It's completely detached from the story. It's fluff. And that's losing sight of the core motivations. What is it that they want, scene by scene, that they're actually going for? Because they should be going for that with a laser focus until something gets in the way. And keeping an eye on that will help you just drag power through the story and go forward with it. It's when you lose sight of that that things meander.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. Or you'll just start plugging in random things. It's like, oh, and then a bomb blew up just to make things interesting, and you'll just go off on tangents because you just realize something has to happen, right? And so you'll just start throwing in random elements that don't really matter and start throwing your story into chaos. And then that just gets you even more stuck because you're further away from anything that ties back into those, pressing wants of the characters. I find this interesting. So, stuck on this point, they created the chaos that will happen to them, but they can't find the character motivation other than they are unhappy with their weight. I would say something like that. You know, if a character has like a goal or a motivation in order to become healthier or something, one thing that would probably help is you may want to make that more concrete. Also, like, what's their method of it, right? It's not just as simple as, you know, somebody having a goal of losing weight. It's like, well, do they want to give up something so that they can lose weight? Do they want to exercise more? And you might think, well, that may not be terribly interesting character motivation exactly. Depends on the kind of work you're writing, right? What was it? The Stephen King wrote the what, the Quitters Inc., right? About somebody who just wants to give up smoking, and then he ends up joining that society and everything. So you can make a story about almost anything, right? But the important thing is it needs to be a little more concrete, I think, than something as nebulous as I just want to lose weight. I would want to go a little bit deeper than that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd be aware as well that character motivations can change. They're not going to stay the same,
Right.
solid all the way through. So you can actually set up a story where, yeah, the character wants to lose weight. That's their motivation. And I would say every character should have, when we come into the story, an ongoing motivation, something, a
Hmm.
problem that they're dealing with at the moment we join them in the beginning. And that's leading them down a path, which then takes them into the primary plot. So in this case, it could be, yeah, we're coming in, this character wants to lose weight, so what do? Maybe they join a support group or they go on, to diet sessions and all this. So that's where they're going in the beginning. But what happens there? How does them being there, maybe
Exactly.
something that they face there, then gives them a different motivation. So the motivation that they're facing from that point is no longer, well, they still do want to lose weight, but now they want to stay alive. Like this is something totally different that's happened at this group, and everything has gone horribly, horribly wrong. So motivations can change, but you always have an eye on what the motivation is at that moment in that scene.
Yeah. Yeah, why do they want to, you know, is it based on somebody else? Because that really kind of gets at the meat of the matter too. Do they just not want to for just the sake of health? You know, but then that kind of points to something else too, like some sort of again, can kind of get a little bit more concrete. That would help for sure. All right. So find your productive time. What I mean by that is, generally speaking, people tend to have times of day when they are more productive than others on average. For whatever reason, the way that their mind works, it just tends to be more productive. For some people, what they want to do is they want to wake up, take a shower, maybe take a quick walk, and then hit the desk and, you know, get it all, you know, get a huge sprint done, and that's the way they start the day. Other people, for whatever reason, it's actually the opposite. It is they want to go through their day, then at the very end of the day, they hit the desk, they do a sprint, and they go straight to bed. And then, of course, there are people that break up the day and bookend on either way. But you will find in general, you tend to go one direction or another. And it's not that you can't write at other times, but you'll just find you're most productive at specific times. I like this, totally more productive before work, so I'm not losing all my brain cells at work. It's true though, the stresses of life, you know, sometimes doing it straight up when you get out of bed, it's like, you know, you're not thinking of anything else. You can just get it out of the way. For other people, though, they have little experiences throughout the day that kind of motivate them. So, do you feel like you have a specific time you're more productive, Gareth?
Possibly because I've just trained myself in it, but 10 till 4.
Hmm.
The transition of morning into afternoon,
Hmm.
is when I work. I block out 10 till 4. That's when I do
Yeah.
it. And just from the comments, nobody tell David's boss that he does all his on work time.
Dun dun dun.
It's the
I love
boss makes a dollar, I make a dime. That's why I write on company time. Is that it?
it. Well, it was what was it? Brandon Sanderson, right? Who got the job as a third shift desk clerk at a hotel so that he could write while on the job, because, you know, you're not doing much besides waiting on people to call you, right? So that's how he was able to get what's done. And actually, it's funny in terms of writers is that often writers will have very uncreative jobs because they don't want to use their creativity for somebody else. So they'll have like the most mindless, boring work that they can kind of zone out and think about writing. And so that when they get to writing, they can write. It's very hard. It's not like never done, but it's very hard to be like, you know, a copywriter and then also do creative writing like all at the same time. Although I guess Gareth could tell you a little bit about that because I think he's done that. So,
It's
but yeah,
tough. It's not easy.
yeah,
Sometimes do you think about going back into the tech world where it's just fix this, that's it, plug that in, easy
right.
peasy.
You
You know,
know,
you don't have to. I think you're quite right. It's burning out the creative brain before you actually get to your personal writing time is it can be a real tough prospect.
yeah, I wrote a couple of my things while I was working as a waiter because in between tables you can write stuff down. You certainly get a lot of interesting people that you can get inspired from in terms of the way they communicate and things like that. So yeah, it actually worked pretty well for me on that, and easier than in other situations where I had a more creative job. Even if it wasn't writing, it was like graphic design or something. It's just different, right? When you're having to think creatively versus just repeat a task over and over again, and you just don't use the same kind of brain power. So just keep that in mind. So for those of you out there who would love to maybe have a professional career with creativity or would love your writing career to take off or things like that, don't feel bad if you have a boring job. It might be to your benefit. So try to take that what's a negative now into a positive future. There we go. Finance, it's math. You think it would leave room for words, but my brain doesn't enjoy math. Oh.
Oh dear.
I don't know why you're in finance if your brain doesn't enjoy math. That sounds like a writing prompt right there. An accountant who doesn't enjoy math. Don't worry about word choice when you're trying to be productive, right? This is if your goal is trying to just crank things out, get words on a page, get a first draft. This is not the time to really think about the way you're phrasing things. Now, obviously, you should not be so sloppy that you're just you have to completely like tear it up, but there is a difference between being thoughtful about it, and being productive, and what you're going to do on a rewrite, which is you're really going to look at the cadence of every word, and you're going to look at things like the sound and things like that. Don't try to uh, write a super clean first draft if you find that it's affecting your productivity. I mean, there are people that write really clean first drafts, so don't if you don't fix that process, if that's what you do. But if you're trying to increase your productivity, allow yourself to be a little sloppier. This is something that can help a lot. Uh, you can always fix it in post. And for all you know, what you think is sloppy now, when you read it in context, you may actually like it on second, and you may just have wasted a lot of time, thinking about the perfect way of talking about a rose when you really didn't need to bother.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's great advice for NaNoWriMo, especially. Is don't get precious on your first run.
No.
Um, that's it's the reason we all know this by now. You do draft two, you do draft three, you do draft four. There's a lot of work goes into making something. Well, I don't want to say perfect because I don't think for any of us. I think there's a point where you're
No.
satisfied enough to
Right.
stop. You
Yep.
kind of have to just tell yourself, okay, that's it, it's done. But on that first run, especially during Nano, when you're trying to get those words down and hit that word count, don't be precious about it. Be happy, get sloppy, and don't be intentionally, as Daniel said, you don't want it to just be a word salad that doesn't really mean anything, but you don't need to go into all the depth of detail and all of everything. Your first draft is running through and getting the structure of the story out onto the page so you can come back and make it the best thing it can be.
I love the story. The first time I did NaNoWriMo, I fell asleep while writing, kept writing, woke up and read the best chapter in my book. Like you literally like slept wrote? Like that's really impressive if that's pretty I don't know even know what to make of that. That sounds like wow. True story. Okay. Well, I guess that means it's like I feel like it'd be like one of those things you try to replicate it by just always writing when you're like super sleepy, just because you're like I write the best when I'm like completely exhausted. So I'm just picturing somebody like on a treadmill and they're like, they're like typing like it's brilliant every time.
It's like when I'm when
That's
I'm
awesome.
totally zoned out. That's like when you have a conversation with people that are asleep and they're actually like answering you, but it's complete nonsense. I wonder if some of that could help with writing. Dictation.
I have to say, I've always had the opposite. Like, I've written songs and stuff in my sleep, and I'll like wake up. I'm like, wow, that was so good, and I'll start writing it down, and I'm like, yeah, no, was it? I'm like, like I was in a dream state, and it sounded awesome when I was in my dream state, and now it sounds terrible. So I guess I'm the opposite. If I slept, bro, it would probably be really bad. All right, so try using weird fonts. Yes, this is something because it keeps you from looking back at what you are writing. And that can be helpful because we don't want to edit as we go if you're trying to go quickly. And by using a strange font that's not very legible or something you do not associate with a book, it can actually speed you up. I know people who do all kinds of weird stuff. I know some people that will literally do white on white so they can't even see what they're typing. I wouldn't be able to do that because I do need to orient myself to the sentence before. But you could do all kinds of stuff. There are fonts out there that are completely unreadable, right? They're like symbols or things like that. Or there are ones that are just harder to read, or other ones that you just don't associate with a book. Like more graphical fonts, and it can just help you not be in that headspace where you're doing. I love this. I don't care what anyone says. I love Comic Sans. Sorry, yes, I can't follow you there. I just can't. Wingdings, yes, wingdings. Don't necessarily recommend wingdings, but that would be a way to do it. Wingdings feels like so like 1990s. It's like really retro. Do you ever do anything like this, Gareth? Try to obscure what you're reading, like maybe scroll down or something, so you don't start reading back, or do you allow yourself to read back? Or
I've not done this, but it's real interesting. I think I might actually try it. I won't be writing with wingdings or like
you don't have to quite go that
runic runic fonts or anything.
far, right?
But yeah, this actually sounds real interesting. I'm going to give this a go. I do tend when I'm writing, I'm almost always just kind of constantly looking at what's come before as I'm going and seeing if it melds enough. Um, which is perhaps me not letting go quite enough of the internal editor to, and that's why I say sometimes I can be notoriously slow um, trying to do that. So yeah, that's a real interesting thing. I'm almost tempted to put into like a cursive font and
Mm-hmm.
write with one of those, which is
Yeah.
totally different. So yeah, no, that's a good tip. I'm going to try
All right, we'll see how it goes. You can get back to me later. We'll find out. But yes,
it.
turn off the editor. Turn off your editor. This is not the time to start going back and making tweaks and stuff like that. Now, sometimes I know for some people, I know for me, the way I get like back into writing is I always have to read what I did before. And yes, when I do that, I'll want to make a few little adjustments. That's okay. I mean, I'm talking about like 2 minutes, but definitely turn off the editor as you're going. And the new stuff, just spit it out and keep going as much as you can if you're concerned about productivity, because it does slow you down. Because the way that your mind tends to work, at least mine does. I think most people do, is that there really is kind of an editor brain and there's a writer brain. um, there's the type of brain that's really analyzing things on the word choice level and getting into grammar rules and things like that, and that's different than your creative head. I don't necessarily completely ascribe to like the left brain right brain thing, but it's kind of that idea. It's like there is the more analytical side and there is the more free side, and if you keep switching back and forth, you're multitasking in a way that doesn't tend to be very efficient. So that's the way, at least that's the way it is for me.
Yeah, I think it's almost impossible to get a perfect, a combination of quality and quantity, both at the same time. That's very rarely the case unless you're some kind of wonderkind at the keyboard and just the stories come out perfectly. So yeah, you gotta turn off that editor. As I said, I'm kind of like 50% of the way towards turning it off totally. Which, as you can understand, it does slow me down because I
Hmm.
have to keep an eye on things and try to
Yeah.
make sure they're as good. But even doing that, I still have to come back and edit later on, and things
Right.
change. It's like I'm not happy with that draft. But yeah, if you want to really get the quantity going, you got to understand the quality is going to suffer, and you come back and make it better.
Yeah. Now, I mean, ultimately, if you're talking about the whole process in terms of speed, in terms of productivity, you do have to think that through because, maybe a little bit slower of a first draft is going to make a little bit less long of a rewrite. So there's always trade-offs. So you're going to have to figure out that balance, but you're never going to get it to where you're going to end your first draft and it's going to be good. I'm having so much trouble with my headphones because they don't fit under my helmet. So this has been the ongoing gag. I hope you've enjoyed it. All right, try dictation. Try speaking out loud and having a computer type it as a technique, perhaps. Simply because for some people, the typing slows them down or puts them in a different headspace. This is something that's going to be very subjective. It really works well for some people. For other people, it's a nightmare. It doesn't work at all. I generally do not do this. I find speaking out loud is such a different process than typing, and writing in that way. That for me, speaking my book, no, I can't. I really can't do that. But I do know people that do it, and it is a game changer for them. It really does allow them to do a lot more. 3 pages of yes, it does mean that your draft is going to look different because it's going to be much more stream of consciousness and things like that. But you get into a rhythm from what I understand. And you can still make some pretty clean drafts from doing dictation. So do you ever use dictation for anything, Gareth?
No, no. I can't get on with it. I have in the past used dictation to record ideas. If
Hmm.
something's come to me while I'm out and about, I'll dictate. Oh, a basic story idea. A guy goes to do
Yeah,
this, and this is the thing.
I've
But
done that too.
when it comes to actually writing it, no. I live in an entirely different world in my own head, and the voice is completely different. My written voice to my speaking voice. Like
Hmm.
I can't really even um narrate my own stories in a sense that the voice sounds like it does when I'm reading it in my head.
Right.
It's a real, it's kind of weird and a disconnect. But that's just the way it is, and therefore dictation just does not work for me.
Yeah. Here's another thing you can do to speed up your progress, and that is skip the hard parts. If you find that you have something and you're just going to get kind of stuck on it because you're like, okay, there's this boring conversation that needs to take place to put some pieces in place, or I really hate writing action sequences, it always takes me forever. Just put a placeholder there and be like, okay, they're going to fight and whatever, and then just keep moving for the sake of productivity. Now, obviously this could prevent you from eventually completing the work, so don't use it as a crutch for something like that, but it can help just keep things moving, keep you in a good headspace depending on what you're trying to get accomplished for the day or for the month or things like that. We all know there's different things that we just don't like to write very much, so you might save it for another day when you're being very productive otherwise, versus really halt your progress while you write something that you find difficult to write. And there's nothing to say that you have to write linearly, of course. Often people do, but you can decide to write all different kinds of things. Maybe you want to write the more exciting parts of the book that you're super jazzed about, and you get all that done, and then you go back and you write what you think is the hard part, which is the setup or something like that. Different strategies. Do you ever do this, Gareth? Kind of hop around a little bit just to keep your productivity up, or do you tend to be rather linear?
Yeah, I'll tend to do this sometimes. Not a whole lot, but it does help with certain stories. For example, one I'm working on right now, I actually wrote the opening and the ending before I wrote anything else because those two things were central to it all in my mind. They were fully formed when the idea came to me, so I actually just wrote those separately as the first 4 or 5 paragraphs and the final 3 or 4 paragraphs, and I'll just fill in the middle with everything else. And I think this kind of goes back as well to the research thing we're talking about, where it's fine, if you think something needs to be researched to get the proper detail in there, you could consider that quote unquote a hard part because you're not prepared at the point that
Hmm.
you came to write that to actually write it. So pop a placeholder in and move
Hmm.
on and come
Hmm.
back later and fill
Right.
it in. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yep. Yep. It's like, I don't know exactly what this would feel like or smell like or something. And you just put it in there and then you come back. For sure. And just don't force it too much. Just because you're trying to be productive, you're trying to be efficient, be careful. After all, the only way you're going to maintain anything is if you're not too oppressive on yourself. It's kind of like people that, they're trying to make a healthy decisions for their diet, and they just go completely all in on some really restrictive diet, and sure enough, a few months later they're back to their old ways just because it was just too much, right? So be careful on yourself, especially as you're easing into some of these habits. Don't go in guns a blazing that immediately you're going to make a complete change in your life. These are all things you're going to have to ease into, get used to processes and all that. And that's not, giving yourself a license to just completely goof off, to be to be realistic about how productive you're going to get. And also, that gets back to attainable goals, right? NaNoWriMo is a very lofty goal. It's challenging for a lot of people. Now, there are lots of writers that do write thousands of words a day. It's not, completely unheard of. But again, if you're newer, you might find it tricky, especially as you get into it, and that's okay. That's part of the process, right? So don't be too hard on yourself. Is mostly what I'm getting at. We don't want to kill the joy of why you started writing in the first place.
Yeah, I think it ties back to that frustration as well. Something like I said, the Pomodoro technique helped me get through because kind of without those little breaks, without that little mental gap, eventually always got to a point in the day where I was or you are forcing it, and nothing feels worse than trying to force words out onto a page. It's just a horrific state of being. So find these times to techniques, whatever you can do to step away for a minute and bring yourself back to a more centered place where things can flow again. And sometimes that means as well it's just not working today.
Hmm.
Do it tomorrow. And I guess with NaNoWriMo as well, does it sound feasible that maybe if you skip a day because it's just not working, that tomorrow you can do 3,200 words?
Right.
Get the 2 days together. Could that work?
Yep.
Maybe just give it a go. So don't punish yourself for it because
Hmm.
it happens. It happens.
Yep.
Sometimes you just have to go do something else and don't force it. I think the work ends
Yep.
up suffering. I think more when you force it than when you just get real with yourself and say, hey,
Yep.
it's not. I'm not feeling here, but I just need to do something different for a while.
Yeah. And honestly, too, when you're newer at writing, in this your career, you have that luxury that you don't have that deadline. So, to some degree, it's a bit of a curse, right? Because it'll may allow you to not be as productive as you would be with somebody really holding you to accountability. But on the other hand, it's a luxury in that you can let your artistic work breathe. So please, uh, allow that. Now, every 5 days during NaNoWriMo, we are going to do what I call our ready, set, right pit stops, because it's a bit of a race we're doing during NaNoWriMo. And this is for our AutoCrit members. So for those of you who have signed up with AutoCrit, take a look at the event calendar in the Mighty Networks, our community, and you can RSVP. You'll get little notifications and you'll see me, my funny little hat. And we'll be able to talk to maybe things you're a little bit stuck on. We can do writing sprints, little exercises. It's going to be a lot of fun throughout NaNoWriMo. So we're going to be doing that. And our live streams throughout this month are going to be about NaNoWriMo topics as well. So we're certainly looking forward to that. We'll be back next Tuesday here at 1 o'clock, our normal time. And so if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, hit the bell, call up your friends, leave comments, all of that fun stuff, so that we can get more people involved. Next week, we're going to be speaking about motivating yourself. Or actually, no, I think we're talking about the middle, right? See, I don't even remember my own schedule. Yeah, I think we're talking about the what they call the second act sag. So that'll be fun.
Oh,
So
that's always a
Gareth,
good one.
yeah. So Gareth, any other thoughts for everybody who are progressing in Nano?
No, except for good luck. I hope it's been a good start already for you, and I'll send all my mental energy to help you crash on through it. Yeah, don't take it too heavily. I think, as we said, kind of all the things that have been through today, and thank you, Daniel, for the tips. A couple of good ones there for me to try out as well. Um,
Nice.
let it be a bit sloppy, let it be a bit goopy. Get the ideas down there. The goal is 50,000 words at the end of the day. That leaves you enough breathing space to put in a few kind of placeholders and come back to do things a little later. You're getting the structure of the story out as much as you can. So good luck. Power to you. I see a question in the comments, Sarah. For those in the Nightmare Fuel class, do you have access to AutoCrit this month? You do. Quite a
You
good
do.
opportunity for NaNoWriMo. So yeah, you should have full AutoCrit Pro access. So you've got access to the member community where Daniel will be doing all these excellent pit stops. And so if you're doing Nano, hey, get
Yeah.
involved.
It's perfect. It's a perfect time. And yeah, for those in the fantasy class as well. But otherwise, My favorite tips were turn off your editor and use interesting thoughts. Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. What are your favorite tips? Comment below, and maybe we'll approach this topic again. Maybe I'll think of some more ideas. I love to think of life hacks. It's like my thing. So, anyway, we will be back next Tuesday. In the meantime, enjoy NaNoWriMo, and we'll see you around, everybody. Bye.
Thank you all for coming.